Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host Eric and this is the show where we're reviewing every movie ever made, starting today with personal favorite. It's The Muppets Take Manhattan. Now I gotta tell you something folks, I'm a big fan of the Muppets and of the various Muppet movies. Muppets Take Manhattan is a favorite from my youth, and I gotta tell you, I think it is the most underrated of the Muppet movies. Now, that isn't to say that it's the best. I think that the Muppet movie is better, and I think a case could be made for the Muppet Christmas Carol. However, Muppets Take Manhattan then would be right up there. It's fighting with the Christmas Carol for me as far as the next best. A lot of people like Great Muppet Caper. I like Great Muppet Caper too. I think it's a little disjointed and uneven, whereas Muppets Take Manhattan, for me, just hits all the buttons. So in this one, the story is that the Muppets have just graduated from college. I know it doesn't make any sense, just go with it, it's fine. And they go to New York because they want to start a Broadway show, but they run into problems. The various Muppets move to the different corners of the country, and Kermit stays in New York to sell the show and get everybody back together. So it's a very feel-good movie. It includes things that I'm always a fan of, getting the band back together type plots. I also enjoy seeing each of the Muppets in their different places around the country. I like Rolf is running a doggy daycare, and Fozzie is trying to hibernate, and Gonzo has a water ski show, and I enjoy all of that. There's some really good songs in here, some really good, and again, I think underrated songs in the Muppets pantheon, particularly the Somebody's Getting Married song at the end. I very much enjoy those. Now, this is also where we get the Muppet Babies from, as there's a song sequence featuring Muppet live-action versions of the Muppet Babies, and while that's a bit cloying, it's also somewhat effective. You can see why they felt like now this is a franchise unto itself. The Henson Rats are featured prominently in this one, as they all work at a diner that Kermit hangs out at, which is a really fun conceit, that all these rats are working behind the scenes at the diner. There's a Greek diner owner in the movie who's a very sweet voice of wisdom in the movie. I really enjoy him. There's also a narrative turn toward the end. I mean, I guess spoilers for those of you who are worried about being spoiled for a Muppet movie, wherein, as we come to the third act, Kermit gets amnesia and he starts working at an ad agency with other frogs. I love those ad agency frogs. They're Gil and Lil, and I love it. I love it so much. I love this movie. It's a really fun one. If you haven't seen it for some reason, I think that you should. Muppets Take Manhattan, 4 stars. For the life of me, I cannot remember if on this podcast, or on this television show, I have talked about the podcast James Bonding. I talk about podcasts a lot on the show. Oftentimes, the podcasts I listen to are what drive me to check out various movies. And a favorite of mine is the show James Bonding. It's hosted by Matt Gorley and Matt Myra, and they, over the last several years, have been really looking in depth at the James Bond franchise. It's if you enjoy James Bond and you have a sense of humor, you need to be listening to this podcast. Recently, they decided to check out some sort of ancillary James Bond movies, starting with Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery. Now, this is a movie that when it came out, and I was, I don't know, roughly 14, I loved. My family and I were one of the very few people who saw that first Austin Powers movie in the theater, and we absolutely loved it. I remember then not being very fond of the sequels and then becoming very soured on the whole Austin Powers thing, particularly because he was so overexposed. Like, you could not watch a used car dealership commercial or a tanning salon commercial without an Austin Powers impersonator showing up in it. So I have not really thought about or seen any of these movies in a long time, but recently, once again, checked out Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery. And it's better than I remember it being. Honestly, it is still a pretty fun and enjoyable movie. I think that your mileage may vary with the sequels, and we'll talk about at least one of those in another episode. But this is a fun movie. Dr. Evil, the bad guy, also played by Mike Myers, who plays Austin Powers as well, is the breakout character, right? Austin is fun and charming and goofy, but he's sort of, you know, he's a Mike Myers character, very much so. Dr. Evil, though the bad guy, really gives Mike Myers a chance to investigate that sort of character, to parody the Blofeld character from the James Bond films, and do a lot with it, whether it's with his cloned son or his inept henchman. The frustrated evil genius is a fun character to get to spend some time with. The whole movie is chock-a-block with goofy, stupid humor, a lot of puns and visual sight gags that your inner 14-year-old will absolutely love. And if you are a 14-year-old, you will totally love. Some of that wears a little thin, but overall, like I say, especially if you're a fan of that sort of spy genre and the James Bond films that it's aping, the first Austin Powers movie is a fair amount of fun. I gotta give it 3.5 stars. And now it's time for Calling All Horror Hounds. This week we are looking at Critters. This is a movie that, for whatever reason, I have been dying to see lately. It's a movie I'd never seen. It is in the class of Gremlins knockoff movies about small little furry things that want to, you know, that are going to cause havoc. I had somehow never seen the Critters movies. I've seen some of the other Gremlins knockoff movies. I'm, aware of your Ghoulies and your Hobgoblins and things like that. And so I kind of had lumped Critters in with that until I don't know, I was looking around on the internet or something the other day, and I found out that the Critters are space aliens that are being pursued on Earth by like space bounty hunters. This sounded like a movie for me. So I was very excited to check out Critters recently. I gotta tell you, it's great fun. I think the little monster design on the Critters is really fun and terrific. They are, however, and I like the conceit of that they're these sort of intergalactic eating machines that show up on a planet and just devastate it through eating everything. But I was disappointed that they're so easily dispatched. Once they invade the farm our heroes live on, our heroes don't have a lot of trouble blowing them away and dealing with them case by case. The movie is also a little bit slow in the middle, and by the end has a little bit worn out its welcome, but it's a terrifically fun movie. It is not something to take itself too seriously. The Critters were designed by the Chiodo brothers, who were responsible for Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And Critters is very much in that sort of a ballpark, although the Chiodos aren't directing here, so we get a much more workable plot. The bounty hunters are pretty fun. I like the conceit of the bounty hunters switching faces when they encounter people, like they can kind of copy the face of people they see on the street. So that's kind of fun, if a little bit confusing. And I do have to single Critters out for having, I don't want to spoil it in detail, but for dropping the best F-bomb I've seen in a movie in recent memory. Critters, 3.5 stars. And now it's time for MST3 A to Z. Those of you familiar with this show will know that this is the part of the program where we are looking back at every movie ever featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000 in alphabetical order, which brings us today to Codename Diamondhead. This is an episode of the show I had never seen before. The movie didn't sound that exciting to me, and I'll tell you what, the movie is not terribly exciting. As opposed to being a conventional theatrical film, this is a TV movie. It's an abandoned pilot for a Quinn Martin show. If you're not familiar with Quinn Martin, he produced a lot of the sort of 70s hour-long adventure dramas, and this is one about I guess he's more of a spy than he is a private PI or something, but a spy who lives on Hawaii. It's very blah. The hero is very forgettable. Really, the only thing to note about this movie is that our hero is frequently outstaged by the baddie, played by Ian McShane, who wasn't well known at that time, but would go on to great fame for playing Lovejoy on the British series of that name, and for being involved in things like Deadwood and a lot of other more recent American productions. He's fun in this. The rest of the movie, however, super forgettable. Codename Diamondhead, 1.5 stars. Now it's time to get spaced out. For those of you who have been living under a rock out there, you might have missed that a new Star Wars movie came out this summer, in this case, Solo. This is a movie that I was not super excited to see coming out. This is the one that's a prequel of sorts. It takes place before the original trilogy and is about a young Han Solo and a young Chewbacca, I don't know, being young and having a heist. It just didn't sound that exciting to me, especially since we had kind of done the heist element already in Rogue One, which was a movie I very much enjoyed. That said, the results are that Solo is pretty fun, actually. It really rests on the shoulders of its charming cast. I want to say his name is, oh man, it's like Alton Emmerich or something like that, plays Han Solo, and he's pretty fun. I mean, in trying to essay the role from Harrison Ford, he's given a very thankless task, but he does a pretty good job with it. The new guy that they have inside Chewbacca, he's really good at being Chewbacca. Woody Harrelson's here, and he's pretty fun. There's an all too brief appearance by Thandie Newton that I enjoyed. And we had Daenerys Targaryen herself showing up as the female lead in a character named Kira. And she's pretty good in this. Emilia Clarke is her name, and she has had, I think, a difficult time transitioning from her Game of Thrones success, where she's absolutely phenomenal, to feature films, where she has been largely miscast and poorly used. But she's pretty capable in this, playing a woman who was once Han Solo's love interest and who now has her own agendas. The movie had some pretty famous or infamous behind-the-scenes stuff going on, where in original directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who gave us things like 21 Jump Street, the Lego Movie, and The Last Man on Earth, were removed like 3/4 of the way through production and replaced by Ron Howard. And it's hard to know why that was, but I think I see it. Because here's the thing. The script for this movie is, I think, really terrible. Like, it's a little bit hard to know where the big flaw in a movie is here. And this is a movie that is not as successful as the other recent Star Wars movies. And to me, it seems like it's the script. The script feels very retrograde. It is trying to be a 70s adventure movie, but instead of doing that in a modern way with a tip of the hat, it feels like it's bringing a lot of 70s sensibilities with it, especially regarding its treatment of characters, and particularly the female characters. There's a droid character in the movie, L337, for whom this is particularly apparent. I really loved L3, and she's this very outspoken droid. And it's very easy for the audience to sympathize with her, but it seems like the characters, particularly Lando Calrissian, as played by Donald Glover, who, side note, really steals parts of the movie, is really tremendous in this. But his character seems like he really hates L3. Like, the lines that he speaks read as that he doesn't like the robot. But Glover is playing it as if he does, right? So there's this constant push and pull, I feel like, between the direction and the performances, which are trying to make a more modern and fun movie, and the script, which feels like it's from a really different and, not as modern era, with a lot of unfortunate and hashtag problematic elements, which is where I think Ron Howard comes in, because I feel like Phil Lord and Chris Miller must have been a lot less respectful of that script and just throwing stuff out whole cloth, whereas the producers at Disney were much more married to a script by Lawrence Kasdan, who has shepherded the Star Wars saga since at least The Empire Strikes Back, helping with scripts since that movie. So what you end up having is a movie that is played very fun and directed pretty fun, paired with a really tough script. And so what I think you end up getting is a just slightly above middle of the road movie, which means that I'm going to give Solo 3.5 stars. And now it's time for nobody's favorite part of the show. This is the worst of the week. This week's worst of the week is The Dog Who Saved Halloween. Now listen, folks, if you're longtime viewers of this show, you know that I can really sink my teeth into a Hallmark Christmas movie. And you will also know that these movies are not terribly good. You will also maybe know that Hallmark isn't the only ones making these made-for-TV holiday movies. There is a whole cottage industry of these things that are like sold direct-to-video and sold into syndication on channels like Ion and whatnot. And it goes beyond just Christmas. Case in point, The Dog Who Saved Halloween. This is a movie that's very much in that TV Christmas movie vibe, but it's about Halloween instead. And yes, it focuses on a dog who talks and who helps his family stave off quasi-disaster at Halloween. Like most of these sort of movies, there are some, well, I was about to say low-rent stars, but this movie actually takes it up a notch. Now, the main star is, believe it or not, Kevin James's brother, not Kevin James, his little brother, who the whole movie you're watching and you're like, this guy feels very much like Kevin James. Well, it's his brother. It also stars Dean Cain, which is no huge get. He's in a lot of these kind of movies. But then you have one of my all-time favorites, Curtis Armstrong, Booger himself from Revenge of the Nerds. Unfortunately, he's barely in it. And then you have a bad guy played by genre great star of Aliens and so many other great movies, Lance Henriksen. But he is also barely in it. It is mostly a movie that is about Kevin James' little brother palling around with a talking dog who, in true Garfield fashion, maybe he can hear? It's very unclear. As largely the dog tries to keep Kevin James's brother from ruining Halloween because of his obsession with his new next-door neighbor, played by Lance Henriksen, who is clearly making a haunted house, but who Kevin James's brother thinks is involved in nefarious actions. So he hires Dean Cain, who plays a criminal, to help him break into the house. This is one of those comedies of misunderstandings where the misunderstanding is so awful that it's difficult to care. This movie is also somehow the third movie in a series of Dog Who Saved Whatever movies. It's baffling. It is not good. 1.5 stars. All right, folks, let's turn this whole car around for the best of the bunch. I'm very happy to talk to you about this week's best of the bunch because it is Lady Bird. Now, you might have heard about this movie a lot around award season. It's the latest film from director Greta Gerwig, a very talented younger female director whose work this is, I believe, the first of her movies I've seen, and now I'm very excited to check out the rest of her catalog. In particular, she has an adaptation of Little Women coming out that I am excited to see. It stars Saoirse Ronan, who is one of my favorite up-and-coming actresses. If you did not see her in Brooklyn, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Lady Bird is a female coming-of-age movie, which is a subgenre that's entirely too underrepresented in film right now. Very much in the tradition of a movie called An Education, starring Carey Mulligan, that I also really love. In this one, Saoirse Ronan plays a young Catholic school student in California who is just dealing with being a senior in high school, making that transition to college, fighting with her mother, and just trying to fit in when she is from very, very literally the wrong side of the tracks, and trying to fit in with her more affluent classmates. It is a movie that, for me, is oftentimes very relatable. I attended private school growing up, and my family was not especially rich. It was, if not a struggle or a hardship, certainly took work to be able to send my brother and I to these schools, and I remember what it felt like to be there with kids whose parents were very much on the wealthy side of things. Plus, just just that sort of idiosyncratic nature of that sort of school was very familiar to me. So the movie is very much about the push and pull of teen angst and wanting to be popular and just wanting to rebel against everything that is your life. And it ends up becoming a movie that's very much about getting over that and embracing your roots. Lady Bird in the movie, this is the name that she wants to give herself rather than the name that she was born with. Ends up writing an essay about her home in California and kind of coming to terms with realizing how much she does love that place and her family. So it's very much a movie about finding yourself, but also embracing your roots, about striking out on your own and becoming your own person, but also recognizing that core part of you that comes from growing up and loving that as well. It's a really tremendous movie. I would love to see more movies like this. Lady Bird, 5 stars. So that is going to do it for Every Movie Ever. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. We'll be back next time as we keep trying to review every movie ever made. And don't forget to visit our website, northmetrotv.com/everymovieever. There, you can watch reviews of every movie we've ever covered here on the show, as well as complete episodes. That's northmetrotv.com/everymovieever.